Hello and most welcome to another lecture, and today we will discuss the border or limits, or what could you say? Well, I think borders or frontier between theory and practice could be sort of dissolved or at least softened. And I will start in an area which is quite unusual. In the exotic East, in Japan for instance, people are constantly reforming, bettering their actions. That's a country where calligraphy is still done by hand. So you learn by handwriting. And if you want to apply for a job, it's often the case that you have to leave something handwritten. And not only when it comes to the hand, in the previous lecture we mentioned specifically the hand, that the hand is important and closely related to thinking, but also all other doings. For instance, cleaning is a very important matter in Japan. The practice of soji. You could almost call that ritual cleaning. And in the monasteries and temples and shrines, this monastic, almost liturgical cleansing is constantly going on. And thereby they are bettering their abstract or theoretical thinking. There is also the presence of a highly complex language use or structure. So who you are talking to and who you are as a talker or addressee is very important to Japan. So-called keigo. And that means that you have to change grammar, words, tone, manners of doing things depending on whom you are addressing and who you are yourself. This makes for a highly complex and very demanding for a Westerner. I remember when I was there ages ago, I felt almost stressed out from this constant engaging of the brain and voice and body, because you also bow many times a day. It wouldn't surprise me if it's about 50 or 60. If you have a job that is costume related or costume orientated, or maybe I have to do with a lot of other companies, I can bet you it could be up in the hundreds. And it does take its toll on the back as well. It becomes painful. And they call this form the kata. The kata. The kata is something you do in a specific order, a pattern. That needs to be repeated again and again, and it comes with bowing, serving tea, participating in physical movements. Participation in physical movements can also be codified into a kata. Precise, deliberate forms. So they constantly train their thinking. Louder Than Words by Kay Bergen takes this up. We now know pretty much, more or less for certain, that the activity of language is centered in the motor part of the brain. So there is no line in between what is theory and what is practice. How did it all start? I think this could, in the beginning of the lecture, to address how could this have started? Well, I think one good guess could be that when science was new, everything obviously was doing by hand, doing by person. You sat in the laboratory, maybe in the Middle Ages, it was some cellar somewhere. I imagine Merlin in the tower mixing alchemic ingredients until something explosive erupted, or something similar. So it was doing, and on the side afterwards usually there were taken notes. These notes were in some cases the only information you had, unless you were a disciple of said master or alchemist or sorcerer, whatever it could be. But if you were not, you had only the book. You have only a slight remains of what was being done. You can compare this rest to ruins, but I don't think that parallel really holds, because if you have ruins, for instance, Pompeii, pretty much everything that was going on there can be found in the ruins. But taking notes is not the same thing as ruins, because very far from everything are in the notes, because some things you cannot properly write down. And in the former lecture I named chirality. Chirality can only be shown. So once you are being in the real world, chirality plays a role. Is it done in this way or in that way? I can show it to you, and you can possibly gather out what I'm trying to show you, but actually you have to be here. So chirality starts everything. One could actually assume that this split has gone on since ancient times. Let's go all the way back to antiquity. What do you say, Kalle?
Absolutely.
Let's move on. We go all the way to antiquity. Already the old Greeks divided knowledge into three distinct tiers: theoria, praxis, and techne. So somehow that division lingered on somehow. And of course, since we copied all what the ancient wrote, remember now what I said about writing. It doesn't even contain everything. It gives a good hint, but it needs to be simultaneously. If you only have the writing, that is not enough. Maybe it's not enough with only practice. You need both. So the notes are important. Think of a whole long line of development of alchemists. So they are progressing for each generation. Each new master takes one disciple and that takes notes. So the notes are an accompaniment. And somehow in this process, especially when people are borrowing books from alchemists without meeting them, or being a student of that said alchemist, you lose that very important tight connection to the practice. And as I said before, praxis cannot be done without. To explain more why the ancient Greeks had this division, think about how they viewed labor. Unlike the Romans, the Greeks, for some reason, did not have this very positive view of labor. It was something beneath them. So usually they sort of subletted the whole acting thing to other people. And these people were called the slaves. So it was a slave society. So they had actually an incredibly high amount of slaves in their polities. Very much more than we had in modern times in the 18th century or the 17th century. So it was viewed with suspicion. Everything that did not involve actual speech or writing was lower. It was not evicted completely at this stage, but you can think of it that there was a seed already established here. And that seed sort of went into the development that happened later during the Middle Ages, where we had this very, very progressive, advanced development of science and industry. During the Middle Ages, Europe did a lot We invented new weapons for armory, advanced catapults, but also the stirrups for the horses, new fantastic things in agriculture and new castles. A lot. And this led to, still in the Middle Ages, you took notes, there was still no proper division between theory and praxis, but that changed during the 18th century with the coming of the new technology. Enters Sir Isaac Newton with his 1689 Principia. There was pure theory in a way, although, very important, Newton did know what he was talking about. There's no doubt about that. He was a very practical person. But this was the first really important work that was almost purely theoretical, and it dealt with what the Greeks would call physikos, the natural world. It was not really a work about philosophy, literature, or fantasy or anything like that. It was about the physical world. And it was all theory in a way, at least for those who read it. Well, to some degree. Some more than others. Of course, when Leibniz read it, he had a very practical background. But when someone, he was not alone, but someone like Voltaire read it, he did not know anything what the book practically was about. And there you see the succession of practice of learning how the chirality was done is actually severed. Voltaire did not even know how to water his own horses, according to testimony. Can you imagine Principia being that complex? I surely must have been the most complex book you can get over at that time. No doubt. I can't imagine anything more complex. And he read the whole book, pretended to know it, and then he rewrote it with the help of his lover. But he knew nothing. And then it influenced the whole epoch called the time of Enlightenment. Pure impressiveness, the severed tire between practice and theory, and then you had only theory, so to speak. And that's not a good solution. Of course, the practice continued on the side in industry, among developers of the newborn industry. Everything was taken in practice, but now we had also a huge disjunction between the ones who were doing it and the ones who were not doing it. So the engineers tend to form another class completely. They were no longer part of the ones who were talking. So they went their way and the other ones went their way. All of natural causes, but it's not a very good start for some reason, because once you lose the practice, we lose the connection to the real world. How would you know that the theories hold? You can't even know if it's the correct theory, because the same exact theory written on paper without the chirality means something completely different. And now maybe I made it clear why practice is so important. Because there's no way to tell whether something is true or non-true. Workable or non-workable maybe is better to say than true or non-true. Does it work? You can only know that by practice. And all of a sudden, in the end of the 18th century, began the schooling system. I think Frederick the Great's Prussia was the first place on earth where a sort of a reformed obligatory school was enforced in all corners of that rather big country. And since then, more and more countries adopted this. And of course, what do you do in school? You have teachers who don't know anything about this practice that they're teaching about, except for some subjects. But when it comes to the physical matter, the chemistry, they read only the books, they get a sort of what they think is a theoretical background, and all of a sudden you start walking on air. And that's okay as long as you are aware of it. But is the awareness had already dissipated. You thought you can learn something simply by reading it and not doing anything. The doing is incredibly important. Why would the Japanese, a great nation of high cultivation, spend all this enormous amount of time wasted on useless liturgy, ceremonies, obstacles? The only reason is practice cannot be severed, and it needs to be, so to speak, sorry for the pun here, practice needs to be practiced on a regular basis. That's why you need to clean, learning how to do something, bettering it time by time, because every time you do something it gets a little bit better. So then you go away from modern day idea of theory being either false or true. Instead, you have iteration, and constantly, for every time you do it, a little bit of betterness, perfection, going towards perfection, never reaching it. And why is that so important? It is very important because you train your organism, body and soul. That is also an important part. It is not just the result out there or on the paper or in the eyes of other people. Of course, in science we have to stick to paper review for good reasons. But out there doing other stuff, it is not so. Because once you lose the connection to reality, the paper review won't hold either. Because you lost it completely and you start working on thin air. I think I have some good examples in the theoretically built. Now I'm using theory in another way than I did previously. But in modern day, communism was a development that started already in the Enlightenment. And they enforced their theoretical ideas of how to build a society. In this society, people quickly lost the very purifying, and I like catharsis, like cleaning up. The cleaning up process is trying it out. Thereby you know whether you reach the result or not. All of a sudden, they didn't care about reality. They rewrote reality. That has never ever happened in world history before. Not to that scale. So every newspaper, for instance, in the Soviet Union, whatever they were called, Pravda, Trut, and so on, wrote only fibs, lies. And that was called theory. And you write something positive, it was acknowledged. It was not lies as we talk about lies, because they lost the ability to tell one from the other. Then you don't have lies, and then you don't have truths. You don't have anything. You are completely lost. And in this way, a whole nation with at least a population 150, 200 million, I don't know how many lives there, were completely lost for 70 years, doing little progress at all. Having a horrible society where people suffered immensely, and a huge destruction of the physical world. And that's not an incident. It is because when you start ignoring reality and not doing praxis, you enforce your things in a way that is crude and harsh. So they destroyed, I think they destroyed a whole lake called the Arrow Lake, trying to grow bambeki, cotton. Thought that they can train the cotton to withhold, to retain salt or suffer salt, or such nonsense, of course. And nowadays we say, oh, that's obviously nonsense according to some new book. But that's a very dangerous way to strip into. Then you don't take the lesson from the past. The past says, do things. Otherwise, you as an individual will lose your ability to tell one thing from another. It's a bit like, to compare, if you're not a sugar baker, how can you make a sugar cake or some nice candies, or why not a Danish pastry? You wouldn't be able to. Read in the book, maybe you will be halfway able to, but it wouldn't be nice. You have to learn from someone who knows the drill. And this is still what's happening within science. Younger scientists learn from older scientists. More skilled scientists or workers or handyman takes the more complex things. For instance, in the biggest building in the world, the biggest machinery in the world, CERN in Switzerland and some other countries, because I think it's on the border. It is still done by hand, although the theory is much more immense now, and we need the theory, of course, but they need to go, and this I really like, hand in hand. They have to go hand in hand, for otherwise you lose your foothold, literally. This is not metaphorically. For you who wonder, please read Lakoff Johnson, how the most abstract metaphors come from the use of the body. And the more you perfect your use of the body, the more you understand these metaphors and the natural world. So the cure for this is, for instance, in the educational system, not to have ready-made solutions. Let students or pupils encounter a world that is much more gritty, not solved yet. Ask them to use their sense, their thinking capacity, in order to train it. Because what happened today, in modern time, we have stopped training our thinking capacities because we are only in our heads. Actually, it's gone so far that there are philosophical problems called brain in the vat. And I think that shows the extent of this illusion. Here we have a brain that's taken out of the skull, put in a vat of some sort of liquid nutritional solution, connected with electrodes or something similar, and to a computer and some sort of device that regulates the body. Where would the person be, is the question that's put afterwards. Well, the person would be where the body is, of course. If the brain is somewhere else, it doesn't matter. If you can make it work, I highly doubt that though. Because the brain is not something you can extract from the body. It sounds very nice because it's situated, I think this is part of the problem actually. The brain is situated in something that looks like a jar, isn't it? You can open up here and you can take the brain out. I think that helps the illusion that is something not in the body somehow. This is not the case. It's so intricately bound to everything that happens in the body, even the bones. And people often say the heart can't think and muscles don't remember and so on and so on. They're just brain dead matters. It is not. There's the new neurologist who says that these days. We beyond that. But we still live in this illusion of a sort of a psyche trapped inside the skull, looking out from two holes of the skull, and transforming messages from inside the brain to the mouth. No, let the pupils have a more gritty reality. Don't introduce correct answers prematurely, because they will kill the fantasy, will kill the engagement in reality. Let them show the world as it was for the first time in their life, not with any pre-understanding. It's very important in the developmental years, especially then. Otherwise, this pacification comes about, because you are handed way too much information. Might be also that the teachers are suffering from the same illusion already. That would help. And they are doing a sort of movement in their bodies which is not connected to reality. They don't move about in an intellectual or smart way. They are not using their voices in a good way either. So all these influences. And now they took away handwriting. The pen is being obliterated from schools today. And I think it can't get any worse. They don't even use the pens anymore. They're on keyboards, where there is no skill at all. Maybe speed at most. But here, there are so many angles, there are directions, there are pressure, everything is being trained. So let the students handle things. Maybe an experiment can be more open. Do what you want. Put some things on the table. Ask the student, let these things interact with one another, or let the liquids in a chemistry class mix them together and see what happens. Try to understand it from the beginning. So it's your understanding. Because your body, you can't be out. You can't have an understanding, as I think I mentioned in the previous lecture, Thomas Nagel, how to be a bat. If you have not experienced it yourself, you can't know what it is. If you haven't done these things, you can't know what it is. You have to do it. It's still a real world. And this world is not passive. It's dependent on you as a doer. Or as they would say in quantum mechanics, the observer. It has a role. And a role can also be to be absent, not doing anything. Because that will have an effect as well. It's still the observer that does something. Nothing is also a choice. Listen to that, all you who defends neutrality. Not looking when there is something going on. That's also a choice. Although I think today we have a hard time understanding that. Seems like someone who's doing nothing is not doing anything. In a way he's not, or she's not. But there is also choice there. This is this negative choice that we often ignore. Graham Priest, the great logician, that I like very much, has written quite a lot about nothing, and nothing does take a part. Not being there is also a choice. It's doing. No, it's not a choice, it's doing. Better word. And not using handwriting, not using your hand, not being polite, not watering the plants, or whatever it could be. It all has effects. Because we are engaged in the world in a way that it's almost like our hands and our feet has roots. And these roots connect us to the outside. And that actually makes us more of an individual. Because the individuality disappears today. If we all are in the blue, we tend to do the same thing. We have lost our experience value. Our individuality is established practically. You can't claim to be an individual if you no longer do things yourself. You need to do them. First, then the words are yours. Otherwise, the words belong to someone else. You've given up your freedom. So it's in a way giving up your freedom also. So this perceived split between theory and practice has grave and sinister implications. I think the most fun thing is that science more or less is continuing by itself, and now people are completely cut out of science. There is a last thing I want to add here. Of course, science today is so highly complex. So even I, as an electronical engineer, wouldn't understand how these microphones works. I wouldn't. I could give it a try. Some level I would understand it, but I would not deep down understand it anymore. Because you have these microchips and everything. And that was before my time. So that's a very important problem. But I'm quite certain we can get around with this, because once you start doing your things that you can do and progress them, you will still establish you as a self-thinking individual. But if you don't do anything, if you don't practice, you lose your place in the universe, because the universe has and will always be about doing things. in theory and practice, hopefully together. Kalle, some questions maybe?
Thank you, Hans. It was a nice presentation. So the philosophers Derrida and Heidegger said that the intelligence is in the hand. But how can we motivate, so to say, let's say, students in human sciences, let's say, to use their hands? Let's say, why should they do, what can motivate them to do, for instance, calligraphy, 30 minutes a day or whatever? What would be your recommendation? For me, spontaneously, in the best of the worlds, I would perhaps write something beautiful for 30 minutes, let's say Greek or something, but or perhaps if I want to learn music, playing music, I would write scores or something. I don't know. Practically, what would you suggest? Something realistic?
Well, Newton himself took to writing. So when you write something that is very important for you, you might want to first practice your calligraphy or your handwriting, and then when you come to writing your own magnum opus, you write it by hand. And that thing will not be the same as you write on a printer or a computer. It will be vastly different. We know that since good authors today still use pen and paper. Isn't that amazing? It becomes a different writing. Many people have written about this, but it's not the same. It's not the same. When you are engaging with your hands, your language becomes more floral. And I think I mentioned at some time that our modern language is very repetitive. It's very, we use less words. We're not using these words that has more meaning. The archaic words have been used more often. So one thing is to write something delicious, like a poem, and dedicate this poem to someone. Why not Napoleon, or I don't know, somebody you want to dedicate it to? Write something beautiful about the sky today, which has this celeste, very light blue. Write something that compels your heart. Write something to celebrate using the hand in a nice handwriting. That I do tell you, and I'm quite sure of it, will have a quite different effect than black and white from a printer. That's my ending concluding. Have a good time. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.